All right, well, we'll go ahead and get started, everyone, and good morning. First off, want to welcome everyone to the Agricultural Utilization Research Institute, AURI, as well as the United States Department of Agriculture, Agricultural Marketing Services, USDA AMS short course on short and long-term strategies for byproduct and high utilization. I'm Laura Bachmeyer, and I'm the Business Development Director of Meat here at AURI, and will be one of your moderators for today's conversation, along with my colleagues Clay Newton and Kim Nesvik. This program aims to actively engage all participants in the food and agricultural industry, specifically focused on local and regional meat and poultry processing and that supply chain to improve that competitiveness of producers, processors, businesses, and entrepreneurs through an ongoing entrepreneurial purpose and connection of various resources and discussion. So we are all here gathered today to provide information from industry experts on the topic of short and long-term strategies for byproduct and high utilization. And kind of for a background, this topic really stems from a larger collaborative project with USDA AMS to empower local and regional meat and poultry processing in the upper Midwest region. And through one of our project pillars, we conducted a needs assessment in our 5-state region, which comprises of Iowa, Minnesota, North Dakota, South Dakota, and Wisconsin, to really determine areas of opportunity and bottlenecks to those very small to medium scale meat and poultry processors. And we conducted this with our processors as well as industry partners, as well as just traditional external conversation. And this topic was addressed and identified in multiple of those conversations. So therefore, our goal today is really to look at have a wealth of discussion on this topic, sharing of findings, learnings, and really opportunities that we can support our processors in this arena. So just a couple of housekeeping items before we begin. Participants will be muted during this event. If you do have a question or a comment, feel free to utilize the Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom portal, and you can chat in that function and that will be addressed. Again, this conversation and short course will be recorded, and afterwards, if you'd like to share with any of your colleagues or processors, you are more than welcome to. So with that, we'll briefly go through our agenda. So again, we're in our welcome phase right here, but with our various speakers and panel members, we'll start with understanding more of a historical perspective to this topic. Then we'll get into a good moderation and panel discussion with a lot of our industry experts, and then leave some time for questions and answers at the end. So in this event, kind of our main learning objectives that we want to make sure that we achieve are to identify examples of alternative applications for the use of hides and byproducts for potential operations to incorporate for your business. As well, we want to learn the historical perspective of the industry and how to best optimize that full carcass value and utilization with our various speakers that we have today. But before we get started, just need and want to give a little perspective for any of those participants that may not have participated in any of our AURI events in the past. And get to know AURI a little bit better. But our mission is to accelerate the expansion of agricultural economy by empowering expanded uses and markets of agricultural derived products. And within our commercialization, research and development and innovation, we focus on 4 different key areas within the agricultural industry, which includes food, which our meat team is a part of, as well as our bioindustrial team, which comprises of co-products, bio-based products, and renewable energy. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started with our first presentation, which Stephen Stoffman will provide an understanding of the historical perspective to this topic today. And he is coming from the Leather and Hide Council of America. So with that, Stephen, I will pass the control over to you.
Well, thanks very much, Laura. Pleasure to be here. Good to see you all today, and good to see some familiar faces and names on the list here. So happy to see you all as well. So yeah, I will go ahead and get started. We have a long time here to talk about kind of the history of where hides and leather and what's happening in that market. I will try to cover as much as I can during that time. Please do feel free to use the Q&A box. I will try to answer any questions that might come up as we go. I'll monitor that very closely. I do apologize. I have to drop off after we do this presentation, but please feel free to reach out to me after the fact if you have more questions or want to have a discussion about anything deeper. And there, like I said, there's some familiar faces. Dan Schaefer, I see Roy Copens is here. A few others from the industry who could also, I'm sure, answer some questions later on in the Q&A as needed. So I'll leave you in good hands there. So real quick, let me just give you a history of who we are, LHCA, our organization, who we represent. So we are the primary trade association for the hide and leather industry in the U.S. We are relatively new in name, but we have roots with various organizations that go back to the 19-teens, so over 100 years ago. So in 2020, we had a merger of two of the primary trade associations in this space. It was the Leather Industries of America, LIA, who primarily represented the tanning sector of the industry, merged with the U.S. Hide, Skin, and Leather Association, which was primarily the hides and skins sector of the industry. We brought them together in 2020, figuring that we were better off combined and fighting the same fight rather than trying to cover too many things as different entities. So now we have about 75 members. Our coverage is everybody from meat packers who are handling their own hides, all the way through regional hide processors, so companies that would be collecting hides from a number of packers in an area, leather tanners themselves, so the folks actually turning rawhide into leather, and then we've increasingly had representation from leather brands as well, so fashion brands, footwear brands, those types of companies who actually utilize leather and sell it to the consumer. A lot of those companies that we work with see themselves as leather companies at their core, so they fit very well within our overall supply chain. So our group is not, we're based in Washington, D.C. We are an advocacy group for the industry, but we do a lot of work as well on promoting exports. We are similar to a USMEF, for example, in that we do attend a lot of foreign trade shows, trade missions, and try to connect U.S. suppliers with foreign buyers and that type of thing as well. So we do a little bit of everything in that kind of association space. So let me start with kind of a general overview of the hide and leather industry and some of the historical perspective, and then we'll kind of talk about some specific issues later on that the industry is tackling. Some of you all may be familiar with this general overview, so I apologize if it's a little elementary for you, but for others, hopefully it's some new information. You all know, as the packing industry, in the everyday world that you work in, you know kind of where we stand with our cattle herd, and I'm going to focus mostly on cattle today. Our industry and our association does cover hides and skins from other animals. Anything from porcine skins, sheep skins, goat skins, that type of thing. But we focus on cattle hides because that is the vast majority of the U.S. business. That's the vast majority of what our members are handling. Globally, that really is the vast majority of where leather is produced. And so we focus quite a bit on the cattle inventory. So you all know kind of what's happening, I think, in our cattle cycle right now. We have, as of the beginning of this year, we had just under 90 million head. We are kind of moving towards the bottom of our kind of 8 to 10 year cattle cycle that the U.S. goes through every few years. So we are expecting that the number of hides that'll be produced will likewise reduce over the next year or two as we see less cattle moving into slaughter. Obviously, for every animal that goes into a slaughter plant or a packing plant, a hide is produced, and we have to do something with it. So that's our inventory that we work with. I think you all know this, so I'm preaching to the choir here, but I'll go into depth anyway for you. Leather and the hide and leather industry is a recycling industry. I think you all know there is not a farmer or a rancher out there who is raising an animal for its hide. And we try to point this out because, believe it or not, we'll talk about this a little later. Believe it or not, I would say the slight majority of the public doesn't know that, and they actually think that we are raising these animals for leather purposes. I do get a lot of questions, mostly from the fashion space, where they say, they'll ask me, so how many leather farms are there in the United States, or something along those lines. And obviously I smack the top of my head and I say, well, let's start with basic animal agriculture economics, and I have to explain them that's not really how we structure our industry. We are a recycling industry, and I always point to the byproducts report from USDA to kind of prove that. This is as I think many of you all know, a daily report that kind of breaks down the price of all the non-meat kind of byproducts of the animal on that day, what the value of those products are, and then what percentage of the overall value of the animal those different products make up. I took this from about a year ago, just as kind of a snapshot to show people. As of a year ago, the price of a hide, a butt branded steer, which we'll kind of talk about in a little bit, was $31.50, which represented about 2.25% the value of the animal. Depending on the type of hide and the type of animal, those percentages will range from less than 1% of the value of the animal. Historically, when we were at the highest point hides have ever been, I think we only got up to about 5%, 6% the value of the animal. So it's a very low number overall, and obviously one that I continue to harp on in those markets that don't really understand that again, we're not raising these animals for their hides. They are coming no matter what. I often call them the wrapper that the meat comes in, and it's what we need to be using. There's a couple primary products that the U.S. industry focuses on in terms of hides and how we sell hides. So the two types of hides we sell are primarily salted hides, which would be kind of what the hide looks like when it comes off the animal. It's flesh. It's some of the extraneous materials taken off of it, and then it does go through a salting process in order to prepare it for a longer shelf life. So obviously it's an organic material. It's going to break down pretty quickly if you don't preserve it in some way or freeze it or refrigerate it. So the industry typically would use a salt-based solution, a brine cure, in order to preserve that hide. The U.S. industry primarily focuses on brine curing, so a saltwater-based solution, and then they also put them in what's called raceways or race courses, kind of these, for lack of a better term, swimming pools or bathtubs, where the hides are kind of gyrated, moved around quite a bit to help that salt water penetrate into the hide and really cure it, get it ready for a longer term shelf life. So in the salted state, hides are good for a number of months. I think some people would say that it could be up to a year. Obviously, it kind of depends on the producer and the product and the type of brine they're using, but up to a year in that state. So the U.S. produces, as you all know, we slaughter around 600,000 head of animals a week. Obviously that pops up and down, and depending where we are in time, but about 70-75%, maybe more, of the hides in the U.S. are sold in this kind of salted, brine cured state. The other primary products that the U.S. does sell is what's called wet blue. Wet blue is basically it's a hide that has been tanned, but it's like kind of a halfway point in leather production. But it's not the leather that you all would pick up in a store somewhere. It's not, it doesn't look like, you know, what you would find in your shoes, your bags, or anything. So obviously I've included a picture here of what it does look like. It does have a blue tinge to it. That's why it's called wet blue. And the reason that it gets that blue tinge, that blue color, is they use chromium salts in the tanning stage of the hides, and the chromium itself kind of leads this blue color in the after effects. So this is the other primary product that we sell. There are other tanning methods out there that would leave different colors on the hide, and so we kind of call them different things because of that. So you can use other metals like aluminum, for example, and other products to tan a hide. So some of those would be called wet white, because the hide actually comes out more white than blue in that respect. And then the kind of oldest version of tanning that we can do in the industry is vegetable tanning. So using plant extracts and tanning the hide, which does lead to a very different textile or tactile kind of look and feel to it as well. For those who track hides and want to know anything about the data, the salted hides are under HS code 4104, the harmonized system code that we use for exports imports. The wet blue is under 4104. I didn't include it on here, but finished leather would be 4107. So finished leather is you know, obviously what you all would be more familiar with. So kind of just diving a little bit further into the process itself of how hides are processed and prepared. So obviously the hides are removed from the carcass during slaughter. That, you know, I think we all know that. The industry in the US primarily tries to use machine pulling systems. So and you've probably seen these on slaughter floors, you know, mechanical machinery that will just pull the hide off and get it away from the carcass as quickly as possible, obviously for food safety concerns. That process is also very good for the hide itself. It's a nice uniform removal system. For areas that don't have that machine pulling system in place, there's a lot more hand-based kind of removal systems. You all would be very familiar with that, I think, as well. The unfortunate part of that kind of process is it does leave a lot of cuts and scratches and scores and puncture marks and things like that on the hide, which for leather tanning purposes is not very good. It will degrade the value of the hide. And this is because every mark that is on the hide, every gash, every cut, even from the animals when they were alive, every bug bites, things like that, that shows up as a scar in the finished leather, and not in a scar in a good way. It unfortunately is not typically seen as a good quality from the from the leather producer's perspective, from the tanner's perspective. A lot of those kind of marks and blemishes will actually just be removed from the finished leather, or will be kind of buffed out or covered in some way, just so that people so you don't really see it. I will go ahead and I'll talk about brands later. Branding of hides is a big deal in our world, so I can talk about that in a little bit, what that does to the value of the hide and things like that. Talked about hides are fleshed, trimmed, cured. So they're trimmed. They're some of the excess kind of stringy material is cut off in order to make them a very uniform product. Fleshed, meaning the excess kind of fatty tissue that would be on the meat side of the hide is removed through a fleshing machine that actually kind of just is a blade that kind of removes all that excess material. The curing process we talked about, and then there is a grading process that goes along with those hides, so to determine where they are in terms of their quality level for leather production purposes. I did mention that the brine curing is the preferred method of the US. I failed to mention there are other methods of curing hides using salt, and in many parts of the world this is still how it's done. I think even in some parts of the US it might still be the case, but basically hides are packed on top of each other with just rock salt, so solid state salt, put in between the hides, put on top of the hides, all around the hides, and then just packed together. That way, same idea. You just want that salt to penetrate that hide in order to cure it, so that it has a longer shelf life. The U.S. has moved to that brine curing system though, because the brine cure does penetrate that hide a lot better than the rock salt does. So it allows for a longer shelf life on that product. So a little bit more about the leather tanning process itself. I've kind of touched on this a little bit, but we do talk about tanning within the industry as the process of taking a rawhide from an animal and turning it into finished leather. And we'll talk a little bit later about the term leather itself and some of the nuance that we prefer to see in the industry. But in our parlance, a leather is a tanned animal hide or skin that has gone through this transitory process. Chrome salts are the primary use or the primary tanning agent for the industry. So it is primarily how most leather is tanned. We estimate about 80% of the world's leather is tanned using chrome for a variety of reasons. Chrome tanning was developed in around the 1880s, 1890s, so it's been with us for a very long time. The industry uses a type of chrome called chrome 3 in order to tan these hides. That's really, really important because chrome 3 is a heavy metal. It obviously has to be managed. There's another type of chrome called chrome 6, which you might have heard of. Chrome 6 can be very highly carcinogenic. It can cause a lot of issues if it is not managed correctly, especially if it's exposed to skin and other, or inhaled or other types of things. I always make this distinction in my presentation because there are a lot of groups out there who don't like what we do in our industry, who like to say that the leather industry uses this highly carcinogenic material to tan leather. We don't. We use chrome 3, not chrome 6. The challenge comes that depending on how you handle that leather after it's been created, that chrome 3 can sometimes change to chrome 6 naturally. That's a natural process, but there's very specific kind of circumstances and environment where that happens. So it's very important within our industry that we don't subject the hides and the leather to those circumstances, so that the chrome 6 does not form. So point being, we tan chrome 3, not with chrome 6. I mentioned vegetable tanning. That's kind of the traditional way hides are tanned. That's what goes back thousands of years, and what a lot of humans were doing for a long period. It is vegetable or plant-based kind of materials that utilize that. You go way back in history, and you can use other kind of products to tan the hides, including brains from the animal and things like that. So they have the ability to do it too. The big difference, there's many differences between chrome tan leather and veg tan leather. Chrome tan leather tends to be a little bit softer. It's more malleable. It's what you would primarily want if you're making a really supple leather. So think of your bags or something like that, where you want a really supple, nice, good tactile leather. That's usually where you need chrome in order to get that kind of feel. Veg tan leather tends to be a little bit stronger, stiffer, harder, but good for other applications. So think of the soles of your shoes. Typically, that's a veg tanned leather, very thick, very solid. Is going to be utilized in that application. Belts typically are veg tanned. Saddlery. You really want a strong leather, a stiff leather. That's veg tanned. So there's a lot of veg tanners out there, even in the U.S., but they are the minority in terms of production these days. Quick difference between how long chrome tanning takes versus veg tanning. Veg tanning can take up to a month, 28 days to a month to tan a hide. So it's a very long, arduous process. Chrome tanning is more like 48 hours. So big difference between your processing capacity and your raw materials being tied up. Obviously, that's one of the reasons why the industry adopted chrome and moved to chrome, was because of the efficiency that creates. All right. I mentioned the different types of hides that the U.S. produces, and specifically the brands, and that's what I'll kind of focus on a little bit here. So when it comes to hides, the grading of hides, the different types of hides and their value for leather tanning purposes, in the US, we are primarily looking at whether that hide has a brand or not. Now, obviously, any other cut or scratch or anything like that will show up in that finished leather and devalue that hide. But the brand is really where a lot of those decisions are made of how to grade the hide. So the industry, and this is all industry parlance, the industry would prefer to see what we call native branded hides or native hides, which is a hide that has no brand on it whatsoever. It is a clean hide from that perspective. We do see quite a bit of butt branded hides. So this is obviously hides that where the animal has been branded near the tail on the butt. We know there are many states, I think it's 14, that still require by law that animals be branded. So this is part of the industry. We know that. The leather industry would like to advocate that if that is the case, please do the butt brands. Because from a leather tanning perspective, it's a lot easier for that hide or that brand to be cut out of the butt portion of the hide rather than if it's located somewhere else, which would be in the middle of that hide. Really impacts your leather utilization down the way. So that's unfortunately what we do see in what we would call Colorado branded hides, Collies, Colorados. There's a lot of parlance there. But that's those kind of side brand hides where the hide might be branded in the rib cage area of the animal, big hide, big brands, that type of thing. That's kind of one of the lower value hides from our perspective, because as you can see, when you lay that hide out flat from a leather perspective, that brand is right in the middle of the most highly utilized area of that hide for leather purposes. So it's right smack in the middle, makes it very difficult for downstream users in order to use that hide to utilize as much of it. They do have to actually cut most of that out and just kind of discard it or use it for other purposes, grind it up and do something with it. I always get this question, so I'm going to go ahead and address it. Why can't finished leather have a brand in it that is then linked back to the ranch where that animal came from? I think it's a great idea. Have a leather bag that has a cattle brand in it that you can say, hey, it came from this ranch in this part of the country. The reason, from what I understand and talking to people about this, the reason that's not really the case is that brand doesn't really stay together through the tanning process. It kind of breaks down, it scars, it kind of ends up looking like just a mangled mess. And so it's not really what you would hope, which is that kind of like clear, nice brand that could be on a nice bag or something like that. So I do know a couple companies that have looked into this. And they just technically were not able to make it work. And so what ends up happening is those brands do actually just get cut out of the finished leather and discarded. So again, that's my PSA from our side of the industry. I know this is more on the packing side as the audience as opposed to the cattle side. But whenever I'm talking to producers, I say, if you got a brand, please do a butt brand if you can. There's one kind of hide selection that's very common in the US. We actually kind of even use it as kind of the benchmark of the market for hides, and this is called a heavy Texas steer selection. It's not actually confined to Texas. A lot of packing plants and hide processors do use this selection, but basically it's a combination of all of the above. It's a hide selection or a product line that will have a mix of natives, butts, and Colorado branded hides all in it. This is just a decision that companies make depending on how the mix of cattle that are coming in. Does it make sense for our business to pull out the natives and try to market them separately? Does it make sense to have different lines, or does it make more economic sense for us to just put them all together, not worry about separating them out, and then selling them as heavy Texas steers? So natives would be the most expensive, butts would be a couple dollars cheaper, Colorado's a couple dollars cheaper than that. And then heavy Texas steer, that selection is kind of in the middle of all of them, just because it's a mix of all of them. So I've covered just kind of the top line of hide quality, of hide processing. What the industry does in terms of preparing a hide. There is quite a lot more that goes into it, as you can all imagine. And so we do have an industry kind of standards document called the Standards Governing the Export of North American Cattle Hides. This was written and adopted by the old Hide Association, and we've kind of just moved it forward. We haven't updated it with our new name yet for LHCA, but we'll work on that. But it goes into quite a lot of detail of how hides should be processed, how they should be prepared, how they should be brine cured, and a lot of the testing that goes along with the brine curing to ensure that those hides are cured all the way through. So there's quite a lot of information. It's available on our website at usleather.org. So I kind of mentioned the pricing of different hides. I can go a little bit further into that because there obviously are more than just the hide, the beef animal hides that I've been kind of referencing, which are the majority of the hides that we produce in the U.S. But there are obviously a lot more types of hides, different animals, and so I can talk a little bit more about the prices associated with those. Again, this is a report that USDA does put out. I believe they put it out daily. It does provide a snapshot of the market and what's the price depending on when the trade took place, I think within the last week or two, what the price was for the different selections. So what you'll see, it's a little hard to read, but what you'll see is these are sales prices for major packer hides, so the large packers, the majority of what the hides are produced, cured and flesh, so there is some value added already in there, and then broken out by the type of hide and its weight. So weight does have a factor in the size of the hide and leather utilization. Weight is not necessarily as indicative of value as it might be for meat, for example, or other products. Weight does come into a factor, but it's far more. There's far more impact on the value of the hide of whether or not it has been branded or those types of things than the actual weight of the hide itself. So talked about the native steers a little bit. They're kind of broken out to heavy natives. So this is just kind of the size of those hides. We talked about Colorado branded steers, again, broken out by various sizes, butt branded, native heifers. So if some companies will actually have a line of just heifers versus steers, heavy native heifers. We get down into kind of the cull cows and whether those cull cows are the breeding animals, the dairy animals, that type of thing. Those tend to be lower value in terms of leather production purposes. And then within them, they've got the different selections as well. The reason why cull animals are a little bit lower value than kind of the traditional feedlot beef animals is because a lot of those animals have spent a lot more time out on pasture. They're older animals. They have a lot more wear and tear on their hide, and so at the end of the day, that's going to be a lower value hide. The hide probably isn't as thick either. When we have our feedlot fed, beef animals, that's a very thick hide. It could be split down the middle, and the drop split can actually be used for another leather purpose, typically suede. Increasingly, it's being used in the gelatin and collagen markets, which I'm sure others will talk about. But that's why the kind of the heavier hide is typically the higher value one. And then as the hide gets thinner, it gets a little bit cheaper, a little less valuable. And we get down to kind of our bulls, our breeding cows, and then our dairy cows, and the value where those are. We'll talk about it in a little bit, but I will note we are unfortunately in a situation with hides and leather where there's not enough demand from the leather side to process all hides that are produced. So we'll talk about the reasons why and all that in quite a lot of depth, but there is a point where it just doesn't make economic sense for a company to process the hide and then ship it forward into the leather tanning leather side of the industry. And that break-even point changes with company, changes with region, obviously, but more or less, if a hide drops below $5 per piece, that's where the kind of the break-even point is for a lot of our processing companies. So if a hide, especially if you get down to these kind of cows, the breeding cows, if you get into those selections, if you go down below $5 per piece in value, then you're talking about a very different equation, and it just doesn't make sense necessarily to process that hide or as many of you all probably know on the call, or there's some sort of shared cost between the packer and the processor, or some sort of other deal that has to be struck in order to take those hides. So that's more or less where the break-even point is. Obviously, that will change quite a bit company to company, region to region. I've mentioned it a couple times, but we'll talk a little bit more about it now. Is international trade and the value that trade brings to the industry. So leather tanning globally typically follows very specific manufacturing industries. So if you go back decades, even hundreds of years, leather tanning typically follows the footwear industry as well as other kind of small goods industries. So in the U.S., that means that we have a kind of a legacy of leather tanning in the Northeast, because that's where a lot of the footwear was produced in the United States for about 100 years ago and before that. So we have a big legacy there. That moved into kind of the Midwest a little bit as well over the years. And then, as you can imagine, increasingly all that light manufacturing moved overseas, starting in Japan, then moving to Taiwan and Korea, and then ultimately into China. So leather tanning capacity globally kind of moved with it. And so that means that the US does end up exporting the vast majority of the hides we do produce in order to feed those overseas tanners. Historically, about 90 to 95% of the hides we're producing each year do end up being exported. So only about 5 to 8% are stay local in the U.S. with local tanners who will take it all the way, to finish leather. Obviously, those numbers go up and down each year. When hides, right now, we bring in about $1 billion worth of exports of cattle hides, both salted and wet blue. So it's about $1 billion annually. At its peak, it was about $2.8 billion, almost $3 billion in value that hides brought in. That was about 10-ish years ago, which we'll talk about in a second. At its low point, which was about 2020, we were just less than $1 billion. We were more like 890 million in exports. So even at low points, still very valuable to the industry, very valuable return. But trade is crucially important for our sector. The U.S. is one of the largest raw material suppliers to the global leather industry. So obviously we compete with other large beef producing countries like the Europeans, Brazil, Australia, New Zealand. You all would be familiar with some of those suppliers. But what we compete on in the U.S. is we have a very stable supply of hides. We pretty much know how many are coming out each week. There's a lot of visibility and transparency in our markets. And they're very reliable. And then we do have a very high quality hide itself because of our beef system, because of our feedlot system, because we do slaughter animals at a younger age than a lot of other countries do. We do end up with a very high quality hide. So that's very highly sought after from tanners and leather manufacturers around the world, especially when you start thinking about industries like the auto industry, which we'll talk about in a second. The auto industry, as you all may know, very, very controlled supply chains, it's where the just-in-time kind of supply chain was developed, needs regularity, needs consistency, needs uniformity. That's what the U.S. and can provide that not always a lot of other countries can. Some can, but most can't. And so we definitely compete on that level. I'll keep us moving here. So talking about the markets themselves, where we end up shipping a lot of our hides. So China, as I mentioned, is the primary destination of most of our salted hides, our brine cured hides. This has been the same case for about 2 decades now, I would say. And so that rang true even through last year. We were a targeted commodity when we had the trade war a couple of years ago between China and the U.S. Hides from the U.S. were targeted for retaliatory tariffs. We were able to manage that and navigate that, I think, fairly well, especially compared to some other commodities that unfortunately took big hits. But it is on everybody's radar when we talk about ag trade between U.S. and China, which is a very important market overall. So China's largest market for salted hides. China has tanners that do a lot of different things, but a lot of the major footwear leather tanning happens in China. A lot of the sofa upholstery leather tanning happens in China. Increasingly, the auto industry is utilizing China, or especially the Chinese auto industry is utilizing domestic tanners. So it's a little bit of a grab bag of everything of what China produces in terms of their tanneries. There's a lot of large kind of multinational tanning companies who might be headquartered in US or Europe or elsewhere, and that also have their manufacturing facilities in China as well. Mexico is a large market for us in terms of our salted hides. The Mexican industry has shifted. They primarily have a very large industry in Leon and Guanajuato, which is kind of in the middle of Mexico. That did a lot of shoes, did a lot of small goods. You know, if you're ever there, it's a great place to go shop for leather goods because it's very cheap and high quality. But that part of their industry has shifted a lot towards auto manufacturing, auto leather manufacturing. So a lot of the large auto leather kind of producers have set up shop around Leon and in that area, and are servicing the North American auto industry with leather from Mexico. Korea continues to be a large market for us. It's been a stable market for a number of years. Again, some of that manufacturing has shifted over to China, but still is a very strong kind of market. Thailand is increasing for us a little bit. A lot of that has been footwear primarily, but they're an increasing market. And then we do still ship quite a bit to Europe, especially Italy, which I'll talk about in a second. But we also ship products to Germany. We ship products to other parts of Europe, depending on what they do. So those are our major markets on the salted side. A little bit of a different makeup when you look at the wet blue, so the kind of halfway processed hides. Italy is the largest market for us now on that side. That's relatively new. It was China for a long time on wet blue, but in recent years, Italy has taken that top level. The Italian leather industry, as I'm sure you all know, has a lot of prestige associated. There's a lot of leather brands that have kind of global influence. You think of your Gucci's, your Pradas, those types of brands from Italy. They are all leather brands at their core, and so that's why a lot of our material ends up there. People are generally a little confused. They think of Italian leather and they say, "Wait, I'm not buying leather from Italian cows." And no, that's not necessarily the case. The Italian tanning industry is larger than what the herd is in Italy. So what they end up doing is bringing in obviously a lot of other European source material, Turkish material, areas around Italy, but then they also do supplement quite a lot with US because of our high quality as well. So a lot of wet blue from the US ends up in Italian leather goods and that type of thing. Italian auto leather producers are also very important. Think of your high-end kind of Italian, your Lamborghinis and your Ferraris and things like that. That's where a lot of that leather tanning would take place as well. China is also, as I mentioned, a large wet blue importer. Vietnam has increased as a large destination for imports of US wet blue. This is primarily the footwear industry that's really moved out of China and moved into Vietnam in a number of ways. That industry is growing quite a bit. There's a lot of opportunity there. So they are bringing in a lot of our wet blue. Vietnam, I think it's still the case. They have a bit of an issue with their effluent treatment or their kind of environmental treatment of the chromium in their tanning process. A lot of companies cannot get permits from the government to tan using chromium. So a lot of what those leather producers do instead is they buy pre-tans, wet blue products, and that's why that market's as big as it is. Thailand, again, big market for us, growing. Mexico, same thing, and the wet blue side, for all the same reasons as the salted side. Globally, where does a lot of leather kind of end up? This is a shot in the dark that's obviously very hard to track. There's it's like saying how many beef animals are there in the world. Well, you can kind of guess, but no one really knows for sure. But about, I think 10 or 15 years ago, we did do a study on that and try to pinpoint it. At that time, we saw about 55% of all the leather in the world went into footwear. About 18% of it was going into auto. That's probably a little higher now. Footwear is probably decreased. Auto is probably increased. Furniture, your sofa, upholstery, that type of thing would be 12%. And then your garments, your jackets, your belts, 5%, and then all others, your bags, your wallets, that type of things is a lot smaller. So footwear, auto, and to a lesser extent furniture really drive this market quite a bit and really dictate how much demand there will be for hides and leather. So I've mentioned we've had a lot of challenges in the industry over the last 10 years or so, and I'll dive into that a little bit now and why that's taking place. And I'm also cognizant of our time, so I'll kind of get through a few of these slides a little bit quicker here. In about 2013, 2014, the US was exporting almost $3 billion worth of hides. That's when our prices were reaching historically high levels. There's a number of reasons why that was taking place. As those of you probably know, our cattle herd was at its low point in our 10-year cycle during that period. There was a number of reasons why that was happening. We also saw a lot of demand on the leather side during that time. So a low supply of hides, high demand from leather. That was being driven by a number of factors, but one of the big ones was the housing boom in China. And in China, when you go to buy a new house or a new apartment, typically it's already furnished. So leather furnishings was a big driver of that. This is also when we saw auto really kind of taking a lot more leather into the auto industry space. So demand very high, supply very low, very high prices on hides. So around 2015 or so, the fashion industry primarily, but other industries followed, started looking at leather prices and saying, wow, how are we going to make money on some of our goods, our shoes, our boots, with leather prices as high as they are? We need to figure out a way to substitute different materials into our offerings in order to make any money. If you think about a footwear company, for example, they have to make an $80 shoe, a $100 shoe, a $120 shoe. You know, that's their market. So they have to move materials and things like that within that space in order to meet those price points. So the cheaper shoes started using less leather. This is when you started seeing in women's footwear, you didn't see the knee-high boots as much anymore. You started seeing the ankle-high boots for leather. And you start seeing those cutouts. If you had like a Chelsea boot or something like that, there's like a cutout that would be nylon as opposed to leather. Those types of design decisions started being made in that industry. But the biggest kind of component of it, and the biggest piece that industry and others figured out, was they could substitute a whole lot of plastic, synthetic leather, synthetic materials, pleather, whatever you want to call it, naugahyde. They started substituting that into their material offerings, and frankly, consumers didn't care. This is also when you started seeing labels like vegan leather, cruelty-free leather. You know, there was all kinds of terms, eco leather. The worst one in the auto industry is leatherette, all plastic. Those types of marketing gimmicks started coming out. And a lot of consumers just kind of went along with it. And so those companies continued to substitute plastic. Plastic's cheaper. Plastic's a little bit easier to work with because it comes in uniform sheets, not a natural material like a hide. It doesn't come from animals, so those companies don't have to have that conversation with their consumers. And as long as they don't get called out for basically utilizing plastic, those companies got away with it. And that's exactly what happened. And we've seen kind of our market moving backwards since then. The market did kind of hit a low point in 2020. Some of that was COVID related and the supply chain problems there, but that was the low point. We saw a bounce back up in 2021, leveling off in 22. 23, we are kind of drifting down again. I don't think we're going to be at 2020 levels, but we're drifting down in terms of our prices as well. I'll briefly touch on the prices per piece, just to kind of, this is the same point again, but kind of just driving it home. And I apologize that the slide's a little blurry. I was trying to update it and didn't get the high quality one, but in 2015, 2014, 2015, a heavy Texas steer, which we kind of talked about, that baseline kind of a product, that was fetching almost $100, over $100 per piece on that. So obviously an unbranded hide, a native steer, would be even higher than that, $110 per piece, that type of thing. That was the peak. Then in 2015, a lot of those changes were made to the makeup of footwear and auto and those types of materials. And you saw the slide from our price per piece slid all the way down to under $30 per piece just in 5-10 years. And that's kind of where we stand right now, is around that 30, up or down $30 per piece, heavy Texas steer. So quite a significant difference from where it was 10 years ago. Historically, I think it was around more that $70, $60-$70 per piece ish. So we're still pretty historically low compared to where hides have been. I do note, obviously this is an active market, so obviously there is a lot of fluctuation. These are the prices of the last 3 or 4 years on a heavy Texas steer. You do see that there's obviously week-to-week fluctuation. And in 2021, we did see, heavy Texas go back up quite a bit, but then come back down as well. So a lot of things happening in 2021. Obviously we were all coming out of our COVID lockdowns, and you all know the roaring demands that happened, within our economy. So that was a big driver of a lot of this, as well as some other factors. But that has come down quite a bit. So, and I'll keep moving here pretty quickly. I mentioned it. The major challenge that leather has going forward, in order to kind of get back a lot of that market share we've lost from plastic and other materials, is we have to market ourselves on sustainability. So what I mentioned, a lot of those synthetic materials, they marketed themselves not as plastic, obviously. They marketed themselves as quote unquote better for the environment than leather. Don't come from animals, aren't associated with the methane that cattle produce, all of the arguments that you all are well familiar with in the meat industry. That's what those materials marketed themselves on, and they were very successful in it. The term vegan leather was very successful. A lot of consumers did not even ask what that means. It doesn't actually mean anything, right? It's a made up term, but a lot of consumers did not understand that that's basically just plastic. And so what we have to do in the leather industry now is fight back against that. And we have a little bit of an uphill battle on this, and we're making great strides, but there's still a lot of challenges ahead of us. One of the issues that we need to address, and we have been addressing, is there's a perception in the fashion industry specifically that leather is one of the worst materials you can use, quote unquote, in terms of its environmental impact. A lot of this is coming from something that's called the Higg Index. The Higg Index was produced about, I think, around 2016. It was a lot of fashion brands who came together who said, we want to create an index or a tool where designers can compare materials against each other and say, okay, which one is better for the environment? Which one's more sustainable? And then that way they can make educated decisions on which one to use. The kind of underlying discussion of that index, though, it's a good idea, right? I think that would be good information if it's done correctly. But the problem is, the brands that primarily worked on this and primarily put a lot of the data together and the index together were all brands that were utilizing plastics anyway, and really wanted plastics to come out ahead, quote unquote, of a lot of other materials. So they stacked the deck against a lot of natural materials, and ended up producing this, which comes from, I think, 2016. There's been a little bit of changes, but they produced this, which basically showed all of the synthetic materials, acrylic, polyester, polypropylene, elastane, spandex, those type, they're all the better, quote unquote, material that fashion houses can use for the environment than all of its natural material kind of counterparts. So leather, silk, cotton, wool, we were all considered the worst for the environment. Synthetics all the best. The way they kind of stacked the cards against us quite a bit was they took into account like everything related to the raising of an animal. So how many acres it used when it's on pasture, how much feed it used, all of the environmental impact of all of these different pieces they threw into the bucket. And then they conveniently left out a lot of things in those same bucket when it came to synthetics. So things like, what's the impact of drilling for oil, refining oil spills? What's the impact of when the plastic breaks down into microplastics at the end of its life? All of those types of pieces left out for the synthetics, but kind of incorporated for the natural materials. They also did it. They only did it from cradle to gate, meaning production of the material until it's delivered to a manufacturer, not how many times you're going to use that material, how long or how durable is that material. So leather obviously holds up a lot better than plastic materials in terms of breaking down over time. You can hang on to a leather bag for generations and fix it, utilize it, refurbish it. Can't really do that with plastic. So they left all of those elements out, and created this really challenging kind of dynamic for our industry. We think it does relate very much to the loss of our market share. We've put some numbers together that shows when the Higg Index came in around 2014, 2015, and then obviously what's happened to our market since then. So we think this has had a lot of impact on what we're doing. So one of the ways we're reacting to this in the industry is we are trying to put our own life cycle assessment together, our own data together. I know a number of other industries are doing the same thing to show that we were unfairly represented in this space. And so what we're doing is not only providing a lot more information about cattle production itself in the United States, how sustainable it actually is, but then also trying to incorporate a lot more of these other items, like how long a leather material can be used, or what happens to it when it breaks down at the end of its life, those types of things. And then we're going to try to compare that to some of these synthetics that we know are not going to score very well. So we're doing a lot in that space, trying to compete and hopefully turn that tide on natural materials and bring them more back into fashion. It's pretty substantial, the difference between our modeling versus the Higg Index modeling. And I'm not going to go deeply into this. Life cycle assessment modeling is very complex. Some of you will probably know that, but the framework you choose, the model you choose in order to assign certain values to different parts of a manufacturing process has a massive impact on what the final score will be. And so the Higg Index, obviously, again, was built not in our favor. Looks like we had a substantial impact in terms of overall environmental concerns. Our numbers are showing that we are about an eighth of what the Higg Index says. So, obviously a lot of that relates to the quality of the data, but then also your modeling choices. And we're trying to have that conversation a little bit more nuanced now as well. Finally, I'll finish up here in the next couple minutes with just some of the other items we're working on in order to kind of right the ship and bring leather back to the markets it was in previously. We are engaged on a consumer marketing campaign called Real Leather Stay Different, or in the main website is chooserealleather.com. This is basically to reintroduce consumers and more specifically fashion designers to leather as a material. So they've heard a lot of bad things about leather. They've heard a lot of bad things about, the industry, things like that. And so we need to actually engage in that conversation and have a more direct discussion. This is new for the leather industry. The leather industry does not have a checkoff or anything like that. So we haven't had that kind of direct to consumer conversation like a lot of other commodity groups have. And frankly, for a long time within the leather industry, there was this kind of ethos that every hide will find a home, leather sells itself, it's a luxury material, we don't ever have to sell leather, consumers inherently want it. Well, we found out that's not the case. And so we have had to engage the consumers directly in this conversation. We launched this in 2019. It's got a couple different facets to it, but it's kind of a new frontier for us and one that's kind of exciting. What we primarily focus on is social media. Obviously, we're on every major social media platform. We talk about obviously leather's coolness and how hip it is, and it's always been kind of associated with a nice material. But then we also talk about the sustainability leather, why you utilize leather, why we don't want to send hides to landfill if we don't have a reason to use them. So we do a lot of work and messaging around there. One of the major outlets that under this campaign that we focus on is design competitions for young designers at fashion institutions around the world. We know that those designers are the ones that are, in the future going to be in fashion houses making material choices of using plastic versus leather, that type of thing. So we want to equip them with information about leather from their education level, from their early stages, so that they understand what leather can offer versus some of those materials before they go out. So we do this via design competitions, fashion design competitions. We get a lot of really great support from fashion institutes and universities around the world. We make it very fun and engaging. We give a huge prize at the end. We fly the winners out to a fashion show in a major city. So last year it was London. This year it was Milan. We'll probably do New York next year. We're talking about, and we really make these students feel like that they've achieved something. They get to see their creation on a runway in a major fashion capital. We do a lot of promotion around it. So it's a really good event, and we think it's going to reap a lot of long-term benefits. So, and these are just kind of some of the photos. We've got a lot of videos on the website, you know, things like that to check out. We really try to make it flashy and fun for a young audience. So I think, kind of winding up here. I saw one question come through, and I believe it was okay. Someone else is jumping off, but otherwise, that's primarily my part of today, and I'm very happy to talk to you all about anything we've covered or answer any questions you might have.
Great. Thank you, Stephen, for that presentation. Very informative, I think, for everyone that's participating. So as mentioned, we'll take this opportunity while we have Stephen on the call to take any questions. And again, you can utilize the Zoom function at the bottom of your screen that says Q&A and type any of your questions there. So we'll give everyone a moment or two if there's any specific questions. But while we wait, I guess I'll kind of kick off with a question for you, Stephen, is you had mentioned that one of the challenges in the leather and hide space is the sustainability. But beyond that sustainability case, you know, maybe what's for our processors and others that are on this call, what are maybe some other challenges that they should be aware of, and, you know, thinking kind of down the road and into the future, any strategy or solutions to address any of those challenges?
Yeah, good question, Laura, and one we could talk about for a long time. And I'm sure you all will talk about it later as well. So logistically, there's challenges around hides and leather. You know, collecting hides, especially as the folks on this call would know, collecting hides from, you know, maybe locations that are a little bit more remote, smaller packers, you know, that gets difficult for the industry. And so there's a lot of challenges there that just have to be worked through logistically. The industry itself would have the same challenges as everybody else in terms of transportation problems, ocean shipping problems. You know, I mentioned the trade war a couple of years ago. All of that stuff that impacts everybody in agriculture is impacting leather as well, and challenges. Opportunities, though, and I think this is one area where this group specifically, this audience has the upper hand. There are a lot of brands out there, and I mean fashion brands, footwear brands, you know, consumer-facing brands that they want to tell a story. They want to tell a story about where their material is coming from, what they're providing to their customers. That's how they're differentiating themselves. And I think a lot of them would really love to work with hides where they know where they came from, they know how the animal was raised, they know where it was processed. You know, this is a very global industry, so to be able to kind of take that apart and piece it apart and provide that story, I think a lot of brands would be very interested in it. So I think a lot of the companies that might be listening to this, I think if you have a supply chain that allows you to trace hides, frankly, a little bit better than maybe others, to talk about where the hides came from, and talk about the programs it was raised under, you know, PVP type programs, you know, that type of thing. I think there's a lot of opportunity to be unlocked there. The challenge is the logistics of the actual tracking that hide. You know, traceability is hard for everybody. We know that. And volumes, and do we have the volume to meet some of that demand? Those types of things. That's the challenge. But I think there's a ton of opportunity there that really could be explored.
Great, thank you. We've had a few questions come into our Q&A box. So again, please feel free to type those in the Q&A. The first one I have here, the USDA price list. Is this similar to Jacobson report that is also issued?
Yeah, I'm familiar with this. Yeah, yes, it's similar. The Jacobson is, and there's others, HideNet, Jacobson, the Maxfield report, the Sauer report. There's a number of kind of private price reporting services that also do report hide prices. I'm not going to say which one is more accurate or anything like that. They're all my members too,
Mhm.
so I don't want to get into that space. But those private reporters tend to be a little bit more value add. They add more color to the industry. They might report at different variations than USDA does. So there's a commercial space for them basically.
Great. Another question we have, should small meat processors and mom and pop shops be utilizing their hides in a better way? Or are they a part of this segment where it does not make economical sense to attempt to use those materials? And Sierra, I'll let Stephen address that, but that's definitely a question I think for our panel that's coming up can really address that question as well. So Stephen, I'll turn it over to you if there's any thoughts that you have on that particular question.
Yeah, and I agree that the panel could definitely discuss this in more depth. I'll give you the historical perspective. Historically, what has been challenging for small processors is you have to send your hides through a kind of regional processing company who has to then flesh, trim, do all the things to make it ready for leather tanning purposes. What's challenging from that perspective is those regional processing companies have to make the decision of whether or not it's worthwhile to go collect hides from you or not. And depending on the price of the hide that they're able to fetch and what types of hides you're producing, they have to make that choice. And that's historically been the challenge for smaller packers is you may not be able, just depending on where you're located, depending on that kind of stuff, it may not work out in terms of the economics of it.
Great. Then we have another question from Isaac. In the past 2 decades, some industries leveraged local and small batch values. Think of microbreweries, for example. Is there a similar opportunity in hides? Where do you see these developing? Where in a slaughterhouse that produces only about 50 hides weekly, and we're trying to find opportunity with smaller volumes. So again, feel free to address this question, Stephen, but I definitely think, again, this is a good question for our panel that we'll be getting into shortly.
Yeah, agreed. Historically, again, just the historical challenge there and what's been happening. I think there's a lot of opportunity, like we were saying. There are a lot of smaller brands who in niche brands that, kind of your micro brew model, that's what they want to do. The challenge is logistics of getting those hides tanned and getting them into a state where then they can be ready for finished leather use and finished goods use. Leather tanning itself can be a capital intensive process. To build a chrome tan facility, for example, is very expensive. Veg tan might be different, but there's other aspects of it. So I think what most producers have found is the challenge of actually the logistics of tanning the leather itself, and then obviously moving into that kind of consumer facing space.
Great. I see another question, and I think it's some of these questions that are coming in definitely pertain to our panel, but I do see one that just came in. That says, this is the hardest part as a small packer. We are paying to dump the hides in the landfill. Are you seeing any places in the country where several small processors work together to make bigger quantities together, or get into the hide market with these bigger guys?
Yeah, awesome. Again, great question for the panel later. Yeah, I mean, it at the end of the day, what you're talking about is, yes, that's the hide regional hide collection model is coming together and saying, okay, either the hide processing company comes together and says, I'm going to put a new plant in a new area and collect hides from those areas. I'm not aware of anybody kind of doing the co-op model where the producers themselves all kind of come together in a processor. But yeah, and then there are definitely examples where larger processors will still collect hides from smaller companies as well. So kind of depends on where you are, kind of depends on your region, but there's definitely that type of activity that takes place.
Great, thank you. There are a few other, what are other small processors doing to the disposal of hides? I think this one we can ask in our panel with that. So if there's any other questions, again, we will be able to provide everyone's contact information at the end of this this short course, but certainly want to again thank Stephen for his presentation. And again, this information is being recorded, so always able to look back on that. But with that, Stephen, appreciate your time today. Really appreciate the information that you shared with the folks that are participating today.
Yeah, happy to be here. Thank you for the opportunity. Happy to connect with anybody who has any further questions or would like to chat. Our website's usleather.org. Feel free to reach out to us, and I'm more than happy to chat with you. So thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you. So with that, we are now going to go into our panel portion of our short course. And really the intention here is that we're able to speak with a few processors and industry folks that have a lot of experience in this arena in terms of these conversations. And I think a lot of the questions that have been posed in the Q&A are definitely worthwhile to that we'll be addressing. Again, a lot of our smaller, very small to medium scale processors are in this conversation. And again, want to make this very discussion based. So with that, I will turn it over to my colleague Clay to help moderate some of these questions. And Clay, I do have, after the intros, I've got these questions to kick it off for our panel members. So I can repeat those.
All right, sounds good. So I think we should start off by introducing some of our panel members. So Dave Carter, if you could kick us off, I think that'd be great.
You bet. I'm Dave Carter. I'm one of the regional directors with the Flowery Hill Institute. We have the cooperative agreement with USDA's Agricultural Marketing Service to coordinate the network of organizations that are providing technical assistance for meat and poultry processing expansion. AURI is one of the great members of this network, along with several others: Niche Meat Processing Assistance Network, Intertribal Ag Council, American Association of Meat Processors, and others. Personally, my background is I came into this position after wrapping up a 21-year career as the director of the National Bison Association. That was a part-time job, so I was also involved in several things, including organic agriculture, pet food, and other enterprises.
All right, thank you very much, Dave. Dan Schaefer, would you like to go next?
Certainly. So Dan Schaefer, talking to you here from Wichita, Kansas. So my background, what I would call myself today is an independent consultant. I retired from Cargill about a year ago. I spent 30 years with Cargill in the meat business, primarily in the beef business, 20 years in research and development. In the last 10 years of my tenure at Cargill, I was vice president of byproducts. So I had responsibility for all the items we talked about here as far as hides, global sales of about 7 million hides a year. I had responsibility for our rendering business, so tallow and protein meals and other items out of that, and then also variety meats. So the things you don't necessarily think about all the time: head meat, cheek meat, tails, tripe, all those items. So collectively, that was about $2 billion in sales, and was a global business for sure. Steve was, he's gracious with his time here today, but he is the leather. We belong to several trade associations, and Steve at the Leather and Hide Council of America was one of the very, very best as far as helping us with global trade on hides. So,
all right, yeah. So while Jerry's working on that, Dr. Rotenberger, would you like to introduce yourself to the members of the short course?
Yeah, I can't see you. Can you see me?
We can, yes.
Oh, okay. I can see you, but I can't see myself. Okay. My name's Bill Rotenberger. I am a veterinarian, retired veterinarian, that I couldn't stand retirement, so I decided I would get into the meat industry. And I bought this facility 3 years ago. We process about 10 animals a week, so we're on the smaller end of processing. But one of the issues I had when I bought the facility was what to do with the offal and the waste product. And we were hauling it at that time to a facility actually out of state into Montana, which was a 40-mile haul, which we do twice a week. And that seemed there had to be a resolution to that. So I looked into composting, and that's what I've been doing for a little over a year with composting by offal and waste product from this facility.
All right, thank you very much, Dr. Rotenberger. I think to kick it off, if we want to kind of follow up with some of those discussions on the high that we talked about discussing with the panel, we should do that. But again, anyone, if you have any questions about not just potential hide utilization, but also along with offal or some other methods besides trucking it to a landfill or working with the rendering company, please feel free to enter those in the question and answer chat, and we will go through them with our panel members.
I'll go through the couple questions that came through earlier during Stephen's presentation. So this is a little longer one, but to kick things off, should small meat processors and mom and pop shops be utilizing their hides in a better way? Or are they a part of the segment where it does not make economical sense to attempt to use those markets? Historically, for processors, they send to a regional processing company and flush the trim. And what's challenging is those regional processor companies, whether it's worth to collect the companies and types of hides that they have to collect. So, main question, should they be utilizing their hides in a better way? And if they're a part of a segment where it does not make economical sense to attempt to get into those larger markets.
So I'll tackle that first, Laura, because I was chomping at the bit. I was wanting to go on to unmute when those questions were coming in, because they're really hitting the heart of a problem and a critical, I think, opportunity. So, if you think about this, the whole goal of what USDA has set out with the last couple of years is to create a more resilient, diverse, and equitable meat and poultry processing system by supporting smaller processors. But the challenge that we've got is that the margins in meat processing are razor thin at best. And, I just did the math here with the question that came in from the person that had 90 hides a week and was paying $4 a hide to have them picked up. Well, if you look at that USDA report, or what Stephen was talking about, where it's saying the average value of a hide is about $30 right now. Well, it is. It's $30 if you're JBS or XL or, one of the big ones that are actually selling those hides. But if you're one of those folks that's paying to have it all the way, that's irrelevant. And if you just do the math, at 90 hides a week, if you were getting $30, that'd be $2,700 in income. Instead, you're paying $4, which is $360 a week to have those hauled away. So that's over $3,000 a week in difference between what the big guys, are getting and what you're paying. And that's a killer. And hides are just part of the equation. Then you've got all the other, byproducts and those type of things that are part of that drop value report that USDA lists. So this is a huge, huge priority. We've got to find a way for these smaller processors to capture some value. Don't have to get a lot, but just eliminate that expense. And the good thing is that there are fashion companies, there are other companies that want story leather. They want leather that's regenerative. They want bison. They want tribally produced. They want grass-fed. Those type of things Stephen was talking about in trying to, take a look at a real accurate life cycle assessment. The challenge is the critical mass to get those hides to those folks that want that story leather. And so that's why through the Technical Assistance Network and particularly AURI and the work that they're doing is how do we bring these smaller processors together to create the critical mass? And it starts off, first of all, with USDA has been willing to put a lot of grant monies and loan monies and everything, investments out to help processors expand their facilities. but most of that is directed to what happens after that carcass comes out of the cooler, out of the chill cooler. We need to invest in things that happen right on the harvest floor, making sure that processors have got good hide pullers, helping them to invest in fleshers to be able to put up those hides in a quality way. Secondly, is to train the workforce to make sure that they're pulling and sorting and keeping those hides in good condition. And then my thought would be some type of a cooperative among some of the smaller processors that are in a regional area, that they could fund their own processing center to at least get those hides to the blue hide stage or the salted stage, and have enough of them that would be identified and traceable then to go to those tanneries. So that is, to me, a critical priority. And it's something that we're all going to be working on very strongly in the years ahead as we work to assist these smaller processors.
Thank you, Dave. Jerry, we see you hop back on. Do you just want to do your
Yeah.
unmute button? There we go. If you wouldn't mind giving a brief introduction before we continue on our questions, so everyone here that's participating knows a little bit more about yourself.
Yeah. So thank you, Laura. Thanks everyone for the opportunity to speak here. My name is Jerry Anthony, and I basically I work in technology intelligence, and mostly we work with big companies, trying to support them with their problems with maybe an investment, or the R&D strategy, or the essentially supporting them in the decision making process of essentially what next. And in this particular project, with I had the opportunity to work with AURI on a project which was related to what else can be done with with animal hides, other than of course leather, and of course the learnings and the were sort of discussed, but and of course I look forward to also answering some of your questions and seeing how we can sort of help the smaller players with what can be done other than of course leather, which we know is the demand is falling globally, and there are some issues around that, but so yeah, glad to be part of this discussion, and look forward to it.
Great. Well, we're happy for you to be a part of here. I've got two more questions that we had in our earlier conversation that I'll make note, and then I'll hand it over to you, Clay. But one of the questions was, in the past 2 decades, some industries leverage local and small batch values. Thinking of microbreweries, for example. Is there a similar opportunity in hides? Where do you see those developing? And the chat came from a processor that produces only about 50 hides weekly, and they're trying to find opportunity with smaller volumes. So I'll turn it over to anyone that would like to take a jab at that question.
Well, I don't mean to dominate, but I'll jump in, again first. But the short answer is yes. And Stephen talked about that a little bit in his presentation about companies that would love to be able to preserve the brand on there, because that tells a story on the hide. And that gets back to the whole thing of story leather. The thing about it is there's an opportunity, but we've got to be able to have the traceability to be able to assure those customers that they're getting what they think they're being offered. And so that's part of again what we're working on with some other folks within the industry on how do we maintain the traceability and the segregation of those products so that then we can market them as a unique product.
Any other comments from the panel?
I mean, just to add on to that, of course, based on some of the findings from the study, of course, traceability is very important, but it becomes more important when we look at some of the other niche applications for hides. The key materials from hides, such as collagen and of course other materials, are being extracted from them and then being used in applications in medical, biomedical, biotechnology-based applications. Now, one of the key needs of that particular kind of industry, which is a very high-value industry, would be the traceability, just because of the kind of materials or the kind of substrates that these uh, collagen would essentially be exposed to, and it becomes even more important when you look at the niche applications, which perhaps is not accessible, maybe directly if you are your production volumes are limited, but definitely there are opportunities for collaboration at a regional, or or maybe like uh, a Midwest kind of a collaboration, which looks at the supply chain, looks at what the needs, where are the needs not being met. For example, is there a sufficient chain of renderers in some states, which might be a challenge. So like maybe they would require a bit more on the collection front. What can maybe to what stage can the slaughter the slaughterhouses take the hides, so that its value can be maintained for a longer time, so that as long as the it increases the chance, if it's for example, what kind of preservation can be looked at. We looked at, of course, strategies used across Europe, where mainly they use preservation, and which can chilling as a method for preservation of hides, where of course you extend the lifespan by 15 days, or maybe up to a month in those scenarios. So what can be done, brine preservation of course keeps it for longer, but there are some environmental related issues with using brine in and associated with that. So of course there are things which can be done. The next steps would be how long can you preserve the hide, so that it gives more time for the decision making process. How can some of the next steps in the value chain be conducted in a more sort of sustainable manner, which is of course applicable for that. And I think one of the things we can look at is what are some of the uh, top organizations in this space immediately doing with hides. And because some of them might have some challenges in terms of how easy it is to implement some of those technologies, but there would be some where which are maybe a bit more accessible. Like for example, pet shoes might be an area where like it is essentially made from hide, but of course there are issues there with like the traceability, and also like ensuring the it is of course food grade to a certain extent. So uh, there are both challenges and opportunities at every step in this. And but the answer would be what's the easiest next step for you, and then like evaluating that, and then like taking it as a step by step process of collaboration, and also working with a lot of the universities who have some resources, etc., in the area, would be maybe some of the good sort of next steps which can be done. So,
And let me expand on that just a bit, because yeah, you mentioned the collagen and then the pet chews and everything, but that is, to me, the other huge, the rest of the offal, the rest of the drop there. There's human edible offal, there's collagen, there's all of those type of things. But the pet industry is going through a seismic change right now. If you walk into Petco or PetSmart today and walk into their dog food aisle, you'll think you took a wrong turn and we're at Kroger's frozen meat aisle. A dog chow and Old Roy isn't cutting it for most folks anymore, because little Fido and Fluffy are members of the family and they want to feed them just as good as they do the rest of the family. And so there's a huge opportunity. We're working with the Pet Sustainability Coalition and others to identify companies that want to source unique ingredients from local producers. So that's another work in process.
Great, thank you. Appreciate both of those comments. And I'll piggyback off of just a slight comment that Jerry had mentioned earlier of some work that AURI has specifically looked at of some different applications of utilizing the hides and byproducts, and just making it noteworthy that that report and information will in the near future be on our website and accessible to anyone that ventures to our website there. So the last question that we had earlier from the chat when Stephen was giving the presentation, and then I'll turn it over to you, Clay, is the comment came from, this is the hardest part as a small packer. We are paying to dump the hides in the landfill. Are you seeing any places in the country where several small processors work together to make bigger quantities together to get into the hide market with the bigger guys? And to this comment, a lot of this conversation, I'll make a quick note, is why we are having this short course and discussion with everyone is that's a lot of what we've been hearing from our processors out there is a lot is just ending up in landfills, and how we can take this opportunity of the various learnings and findings and find potential opportunities and solutions. So appreciate your comment. So who would like to take a comment towards this question?
I can take that one, Laura.
Perfect.
So, and I'll probably dive off into a couple other areas here. So, one of the things that's happened on these small plants is it really comes down to a lot of it. We talk about economy of scale or aggregation. Darling exited the hide industry probably 4 years ago. So when they used to come pick up rendering at different plants and go through that process, they would also pick up hides. And when they exited that industry, you lost that ability to aggregate those hides at a central location that Darling had, and then go on further process those, grade them, flesh them, do all that kind of stuff. So I think that's part of what the industry lost. Now they had a small regional processor that came in there, but I don't think they're going to run trucks around to pick up hides in that small quantities. Just kind of going through a few numbers here. 50 head a week. It's about, on average, that should be probably about 4,000 pounds. If they're $10 a piece, don't forget there's labor in fleshing, there's cost to cure, there's packaging, and that goes into getting that $30. So it's not all pure revenue. There's cost to get there. I mean, at $10 a hide, it's $500. So it seems like a lot if you're producing them. It's probably not enough to cover freight and other things like that. If you were going to look at that, the positive side, if you could pull through and put together the entire value chain to get that converted, 50 hides a day or 50 hides a week, they're about 45 square foot per hide. It takes about 3 square foot to make a pair of shoes. So that's, really equivalent to about 750 pairs of shoes if you want to put it in that type of aspect. Not to be the contrarian here, but the big barriers. Steve mentioned some of those machine pulled versus knife blade hides, and again, he talked about holes, but it even comes down to just small cuts. And a lot of this comes out, how it was ever explained to me, is as a meat industry, we buy the animal per pound, we sell hides per piece, and the textile industry all deals on a square foot basis. So when they talk about, I'll talk about a hide at $30, they're going to talk about crust leather at $4 a square foot. And they're going to compare that to cotton. They're going to compare it to nylon, rayon, other materials like that. And that's a lot of where Steve talked about in the design fashions versus being an all leather item. When leather gets expensive, they'll start to pull in other components that might be cheaper. So, but as you look at that on a per square footage, everything in the leather industry is designed to stretch and squeeze and pull that hide to make it a little bit bigger square footage. So even a small, it wouldn't even be a complete cut through the hide, as it goes through that process, may start off being 1/4 inch wide and 1/4 inch deep. It's going to be 4 square inches when you get done. And depending on the location, that could be devastating for the value of that hide, just as Steve talked about with the brand. I mean, again, the brand is 1-2 square foot of unutilizable space in the hide. And the really bad thing that happens today, I mean, if a hide's worth $30, the chemicals to get it to just that wet blue stage is probably another $30 per hide. And you'd say, well, why don't you just cut out the brand or cut out the defect ahead of time, and then you wouldn't need to spend that much money on the chemicals. But a lot of the equipment doesn't work that way. It requires a whole piece. Any cuts or tears tend to hang up in the equipment and become bigger cuts and tears as they go along. So for what it's worth, that's probably a lot of why the economy of scale comes together. I think that, I say, Darling exiting the hide business, I think it was in 2017, so 6 years ago. I think that took away a lot of the aggregation from a small processor standpoint. And like I say, knife blade hides have really taken a big discount, especially at these low values. And the other thing small plants probably challenged with are inspection for export. The domestic, I mean, Steve didn't talk about it. He's got members that are domestic leather producers, but they're small. I mean, like he indicated, 90+% of the hides are exported at some point in time in their life cycle. So to be able to export, typically you've got to have ante-mortem, post-mortem inspection. You've got to have veterinary certificate, all these other things. It's just not a real simple hoop to jump through from an APHIS standpoint. So I think when you're talking about a smaller state inspected plant, I mean, your target really needs to be for a domestic leather production area, which probably needs to be developed. I don't think we wouldn't be talking about this if it already existed. So.
Great, thank you. Any other comments or experiences of several small processors working together to make those larger quantities to get to markets for any of the larger, bigger guys? Any examples?
This is Bill.
Yeah.
I'm looking at this facility from a practical standpoint, and I'm not sure that tackling the issue of hides is important to those of us in a small plant. We're more interested in reducing that expense of disposal of offal and hides from the start. When we talk about hides, that's another minor thing that may give us additional income at some point down the road. But right now, it's more important for us not to create an expense for getting rid of those hides. And we can get rid of those hides by composting. So that reduces that cost of having to go through the process of finding a place and a way to get rid of the hides. Now, if you want to set up a prototype of some sort where like the Ag Utilization Research Institute, if you could set up a plan of how you would perceive the gathering of these hides to go to a tannery, but for us as small facilities, it just takes up too much of my time to try to increase a small fractional part of an income. There are other ways that I can cut my costs other than trying to improve, have an avenue by which I can have more income. I need to reduce the expenses to start with. Now, I did have an experience with a tannery in Minneapolis, and he was interested in setting up a route to pick up hides. But in the process of doing that, there's an expectation that the small plant would prepare the hides and store them in a facility so they don't deteriorate. Well, you're creating an additional expense that most of us in the small plants wouldn't even consider doing, when I have the opportunity of just putting in a compost pile, it's done. I don't have to spend the time, the effort, equipment to try to get that fit to go to a tannery. Until we get to a point where it doesn't create an expense for us, yeah, then we're interested. But right now, I don't see the feasibility of trying to salvage hides for an additional income. There are too many other ways for us as small plants to cut our costs and then worry about creating an income later from an item like hides.
Great, thank you. Appreciate those comments and thoughts, especially being a processor. Dave, did you have any final comments to that question?
No, and I just think that some of the folks that we're working with would want to use all of the animal as much as possible. And there are folks. I mean, Patagonia is probably the best example of somebody that's really trying to identify their leather as to where it comes from and the like. And so we are working with some folks. There is a company called Other Half Processing that is, taking a look at what can we do to do some things. And Dr. Rottenberg, I appreciate, yeah, you don't want to create the extra expense and all of that, but if we can train people to pull the hides without nicking them and scoring, and to do the basic things to put them up, then would there be an opportunity to aggregate those and to create a little bit of value and supply those companies that want that, what they're calling story leather?
I agree with you. That's great, but I don't think that the small plants are the ones that can take the impetus to do that. It needs to come from a larger organization to set up a system by which those things can be done. As far as nicks and cuts in the hides, yeah, we can all be trained to do a better job on that particular end. It just, the whole flow chart of supplying hides needs to be laid out in a systematic manner by somebody other than small plants.
Great.
And I agree. I think one thing I look at is the offal, the bones and the meat and all the rest of that. I think there's a larger opportunity to process that in a way to make it available for the pet industry. And that would be easier for me to package that in such a way that it could be in a larger volume to go to a facility that could produce pet food.
No argument there. And I'll just throw this in real quick. We actually developed a document on pet food, pet products manufacturing for small processors that is on the toolkit that we have at Flowery Hill.
I'd be glad to. I'd be glad to see that process, because I really think that has more potential than the hide thing, dollar wise, and it would probably be easier to transport, easier to get into the commerce system than the hides would be. I'm not opposed to the hide thing. I just think the hide thing doesn't generate a lot of dollars for us small plants, but the awful part of it would generate a lot. But I have to tell you that I feel very comfortable in doing the composting, because that is an easy way to generate some income, as well as to provide an item for local farmers, ranchers to use, and it's easy to get rid of after you compost it.
Excellent. Well, thank you for those comments towards that question. So I'll turn it over to you, Clay.
Yeah. I've seen a few different questions come in, specifically looking for some more information on how you do the composting, Dr. Rodenberger. So I'll probably merge a couple of these together, as I think they work well together. One of them is, do you use in-vessel, windrow, bunker system, as well as Christine said with the next round of grants being opened up, that she's looking at different types of composters to help with the offal and hide utilization. And she's asking, what did you go with and why did you choose the type of equipment that you went to, as well as are you currently selling the compost to individuals or to a larger company?
Let's take that one question at a time.
All right.
There were several in there, if you don't mind. I guess I'll give you a little background on what I've done and what I've went through. Seeing that there was an expense in getting rid of the byproduct, the waste, I started out thinking, all right, I'm just going to get rid of the cost of doing that. So I looked into composting, and through the extension department with the state of North Dakota, they have done some composting and have some connections on different things you could do in your composting. With that information, I decided that I was going to try to do it and more or less experiment on my own on how I could eliminate the cost of getting rid of the offal. And what I did, and what I found out, that if I put down 2 foot of organic material, straw, corn stalks, manure, whatever, and then put down a layer of offal, and then put another layer of organic material on that. And I found that if we leave that for a period of probably close to 30 days and then start turning it, most of that will be gone except for the large bones. The hide and all that will be gone. And there is enough moisture in the carcass to accommodate for the moisture you need to compost, and you will generate a lot of heat. And it's surprising, even in the wintertime, these compost piles do not freeze. We try to reach a temperature of 130 degrees, which we use a thermometer, and we don't want to exceed 160 degrees, because then we're getting too much heat and we're turning our product into ash, which we're still getting rid of it, but it decreases its value. So, and I did attend a workshop by someone in Northern Illinois that puts on a composting seminar to deal with making compost that they use for commercial purposes. I'm not sure that the compost that I'm making would fit into a commercial home gardening situation, because of I don't have any certification as to being disease-free. If you're using straight compost material like it's corn stalks and adding water and making a humus out of it, there isn't any bacterial risk to that sort of thing. But you could combine that sort of a system with the composting of carcasses and have a very viable second industry with this business, and it could be very profitable. The cost of, or the revenue from this composting material, visiting with the people that put on the humus workshop, we're talking about $400 to $500 per ton. And of course, the weight's going to vary upon the percent moisture, but the percent moisture is also critical to making a good humus. Now, if there's individual questions that I haven't answered, I'd be glad to answer them.
Yeah, I think first to go with, what type of setting are you doing this on? Is it in a windrow? Is it in a bunker? Are you doing it on cement or just on like a gravel base?
I did a little research on that as well. By having it on a solid cement surface, you're subjecting yourself to water runoff and that sort of thing. They suggested to me that you just leave it on a flat dirt surface, and then you take and run it so that the water, the rain and that sort of thing goes down the hill. Don't run it diagonally to the slope, run it down the slope. Okay. And so it's in windrows, so that you can turn your windrows over. and keep doing the recycling of the offal. What was your other question?
I think the next one was, well, I guess just kind of a general question off of that. Why do you choose to go with windrows instead of like a self-contained sort of setup?
Well, I think the windrows lends itself to being able to work with the pile. If you put it in a bunker, how do you get it turned efficiently? If you got it in a windrow, you can turn it either direction. And you need to turn it occasionally to keep the heat going and have the decomposition occurring.
All right. I guess another one.
Let me just add on that, because I'm familiar, some folks have looked at they're a barrel system or a roller system that you put it in one end and it goes through and it comes out the other end. It's a great system. The only problem is it's not really designed for large scale. If you're processing more than about 3 animals a day, you're going to need multiple of those systems. So they just haven't built them yet to be able to do that. So yeah, the systems I've seen, the windrows is the best way to go.
Yeah, and I agree with you. It would probably be a whole lot different if I had 50 carcasses a week. The area would have to be much larger, and you'd have to probably have somebody designated to take care of that on a daily basis. So volume is a critical item.
All right. I guess another one is when it comes to utilizing that compost at the end when it's ready, are you using that yourself or have you found another outlet for it? And if you've done some looking into how you'd be able to sell it, what would be the steps that someone would have to take for that?
Well, what I've done so far is I have a ranch, so we're using it on our own facility to spread it. One of the issues I'm now trying to resolve is the bones. The bones are still too big to just put out on the land. So I'm looking into a way to run that through some sort of crusher. Certainly there's an opportunity to sell it, but I've not gotten to that point. I've composted probably, we've got over 500 carcasses in windrows on this facility, and we're not using very much space at all. We've got 3 rows of probably 200 feet long for 500 carcasses.
All right, fantastic. Would anyone else on the panel know the method that you'd have to go through to sell the compost?
I would add that, yeah, there is a certification process. There is a national composting association that will set up your guidelines. I have not gotten to the point of pursuing that, but I think a person needs to understand the calcium nitrogen ratio, because that is one of the things that with the North Dakota license that I have, when it comes time to applying it to the land, there will be a determination of how much product you can put on the land, and you will have to know what that compost composition is, as well as there is a company, I think it's in Illinois as well, that will test your product for calcium and nitrogen and other elements as well, because we're also interested in the phosphorus as far as on the land fertilization. So you would have to do that in order to understand what product you have and how much you can use per acre.
All right. And looking at, you kind of covered this a little bit, but as far as you said, hides break down fully, correct?
Yes.
And I'm guessing that all the meat does too, and most of the drop offal, but bones are being the biggest issue. I'm guessing mainly like the femur, humerus, skull, those sort of large diameter bones. Do they decrease in size, or are you thinking that you'll have to end up running them through some sort of crusher to best
They-
be able to utilize
They
that?
become pretty brittle, but they're too large to just put out on the land because of the complications with farm equipment. You're right, the femur's the worst one of all. The skull doesn't break down very fast, as well as the shoulder blade and the jawbone. But most of the rest of them are gone. They're just deteriorating and they're not an issue.
Awesome. Well, thank you. Another question that came from Jessica was that she's been encouraged to turn processing wastewater into fertilizer through land application. Would anyone know of what potential information or what infrastructure you would need to do in a situation like that?
I've not dealt with that specifically at this point. I certainly have got an interest in because this facility has sewage tanks, and I have my own truck to pump it, a 3,000-gallon truck to pump our tanks, and I dispose it in the local lagoon. But there should be a real value to that water, considering where it's coming from. But I've not tested it. I don't have any information yet on that.
All right. Another one came from Jessica saying that she does not currently collect blood, but what specifically would be involved in the collecting of blood for potential utilization as far as blood meal, storage, or drying it down for fertilizer use?
Yeah, I can talk to the commercial, what's done industrially or commercially from a blood standpoint. So typically the blood is steam coagulated. So just using steam heat, you'll coagulate the proteins and then utilizes centrifuge then to de-water. So that's just one step to take it from, blood starts off at close to 90% water, but that's steam coagulation, and gravimetric separation will get you about half the water out, and then after that, it's typically goes through some type of dryer. We used rotary gas-fired dryers, get the moisture down to about 8%, and then go through a hammer mill at that point in time. So, but there's probably ways to, I say, steam coagulation is pretty cheap way to get it there, and then drying that slurry is really probably the tougher or second part of it. I'd also, throw the question over from a composting standpoint. Do you put the blood into the compost, or is that a separate waste stream for you?
No, it all goes into composting, but I'm interested in your idea of the blood because as a veterinarian, I understand there's a real nutritive value to the blood. I'm interested in knowing what kind of equipment would it take to dry that so you would actually have a powdered blood meal.
Yeah, and like I say, the ones that we used were they're large and expensive Usilac dryers, but I'm sure there's other simpler ways to do it than that. But like I say, the key part's removing half the moisture with a simple steam coagulation. Most of those were home built type of units, just pipes with steam, live steam injection.
Everything that goes through this facility, processing wise, goes into my composting pile, except for the sewage I pump, because there's just too much water there to mix with the composting material because of like you've already stated, that's all. Most of that offal is 70% moisture. So I've got plenty of moisture. I need to add dry material to it to make it a good compost. So all the sewage I'm just dumping, but there should be a value to it. But like I said, I've not tested it to know what the nutritive value is, because there's certainly a lot of blood that we don't collect that goes into those sewage tanks.
All right. Another question came in asking, if anyone that you've worked with is utilizing a local landfill to discard of offal and or hides, and if so, have you heard about them having any issues with the landfills being able to handle the volume with anyone that you've worked with?
The landfill that I used was a city-owned landfill in Baker, Montana, which was like 7 or 8 miles out of from their town, and they had plenty of surface area. They took it. We just paid so much by the weight to put it in there. They weren't getting rid of all of it. They were just composting it, just like they were doing with regular human garbage. They were packing it into a pile and that sort of thing. But they were charging us to bring it in there.
All right. Back to a little bit more, a question more focused on the hide side of things. This one came in asking, are small processors in the industry organization in a state, could they go to their state and approach a regional hide processor to set up a centralized collection location? And with that centralized location, needing to work with that hide processor to schedule a pickup potentially once a week, or
bonus for you. No.
I know that there's some work in Oregon along that line. The Niche Meat Processing Assistance Network has been working with the Oregon Department of Agriculture to set up a pilot program. It's relatively new, so I don't have a lot of information on it, but it's something that, yeah, we want to see if there's some potential on that.
all right. And then along with that, I think if anyone is going to be going down that route, I think it'd be important for anyone on the short course to know what some potential preservation methods would be, whether it be cooling, salting, or any other sort of stream, and what exactly that would entail.
Yeah, absolutely.
Jerry, do you have anything that you were able to find on your looks as to hide preservation and how long that might be and the work that's done with that?
So I mean, of course, there are two major approaches for hide preservation. One is, of course, using the salting method, which typically brine solution is used in that situation. This is what the leather industry uses as well. What we saw is, of course, the European industry prefers to use coolers for preservation of hide. Of course, that does bring some changes into the supply chain. You can't hold it for as long as so. I guess the supply chains need to be a lot tighter in that scenario. But yeah, I mean, this would definitely avoid a lot of the effluent treatment costs associated with using brine. There's a lot of salt which goes into the brine solution, which if you extrapolate that to a large volume of hides, it is another potential sort of issue. So yeah, for preservation, there is that. There are also some maybe techniques which are of course not as ready, where you can do both a preservation come unhairing using some kind of an enzymatic approach. Of course, this was some work which was done by the Leather Institute in, of course, another country, but the technology, etc., is available. But it's essentially using an enzymatic approach to combine hide preservation along with unhairing. This might be something which maybe in a few years might I don't know how accessible the technology is right now, but at least it's developed to at least a pilot scale by that particular institute. And so there is some work happening which might challenge the ecosystem and maybe solve two issues at once. Like instead of having something for dehairing, you can maybe combine it with a preservation sort of a system, and ultimately you then can use something like that. So so yeah, I mean, those are some of the things we saw in terms of preservation. Of course, a centralized approach might be, but every state has its own sort of ecosystem of processors, and and also people utilizing the hide, and so there are different challenges there, in terms of waste. That's one of our findings. So in some cases, having a centralized location would definitely help. In some cases, maybe two or three processors collaborating and pooling the resources might be the best strategy uh, of preservation.
All right. Thank you, Jerry. I guess one other question that I'm kind of interested in kind of goes back to composting. And when it comes to, obviously the windrow approach has worked really well for you, Dr. Rotenberger, but Dave, you brought up a sort of mechanically run drum. Would you like to kind of explain a little bit more about that and how that's run?
Yeah, no, it's just it's continually it's almost like a cement mixer, a long barrel cement mixer, and you put the material in. I know one of the folks that developed one of the first modular processing plants down in Texas used that, and she said that the issues that she had too is Dr. Rottenberg said, that you have to keep your carbon nitrogen levels very consistent. And so, what she was using for the carbon was the cuttings from a local landscaping company or tree trimming company. And there was a lot of variation, dead, live wood, species, all of that. So there was a lot of difficulty. Also, she recommended that if anybody was going to do it, it would be helpful to have a bone crusher there to break down the bones, so you didn't get the femurs and the skulls through there. It's like I say, it's a very clean, impressive system. It's just very low volume. I'm thinking off the top of my head, but it's about 900 pounds, a day that could go through there. And that's all your offal and your hides and all of that. So like I say, it breaks down to about 4 animals if you're going to be doing something. So it has some potential, but there are some limitations. We do have, and I know they're going to put this into the chat or post it to everybody, but we do on our website and our toolkit have sort of a resource guide for composting that talks about the different technologies. That's really a good document that you can go through and use as sort of a basis to make some initial decisions on whether or not or which approach is best for you.
All right. I guess another thing, when it comes to composting waste materials, it seems kind of like we're focusing on beef. Have you, Dr. Rotenberger, or anyone else who's worked on this, seen many difficulties when you incorporate other species in there, whether it be pork or sheep or goats or anything like that?
We do all the species through our composting pile. In fact, the goats and the sheep and the hogs disappear entirely. They're much easier to process because they don't have the large bone structures to deal with. The other thing is they don't have the large rumen contents, the extra offal that's present in a ruminant animal. The federal government under USDA, when they have whole flock dispersions, eradication programs, even with hogs, they just bury them, and they totally disintegrate. The thing with the ruminants is that we have to open up that rumen so that the gas escapes in the decomposition process. If you don't do that, they'll blow it up and kind of disrupt your pile, and you can use that rumen contents and the fluids to help you in your decomposition process.
Well, we've kind of covered a lot about bones being a big issue, but what are some other potential issues or difficulties when it comes to composting? Maybe potentially with like pest management, scavengers, or anything along those lines, and how would someone best handle a situation like that?
I found that when I first came, we were putting it in a large trailer and then hauling it to the landfill. In that process, you get maggot production in the summertime. There's a real strong odor to the whole thing. It's very disgusting. But when we went to composting, as long as you cover the raw product, you won't have the scavengers involved because they won't dig through it. And it has reduced the odor tremendously to actually pretty much nothing, except on the days that you turn it. And once, if you turn it once or maybe twice, then even those odors are gone. And there really is no fly production because you got it covered with organic material. So that's been a very positive thing with the composting, is that's reduced the fly production and it's reduced the odors.
And I know one thing that we keep talking about is the potential need for a bone crusher. Would you know roughly what sort of monetary investment that would be to get a bone crusher up and running? And would that be something that's powered through an external diesel or gas engine, or would that be electric?
Ironically, I was on the website today with an auction company looking at rock stone crushers, and that system would work really well. I do not know what the cost would be. I've tried to ask the local manufacturer to build me one, and they said it would be pretty expensive. The system is not all that complicated because you're just running it through something that will break those bones up, and it's either electrical or diesel powered or power takeoff system on a tractor to run it. It wouldn't take a whole lot. It's just a matter of finding the right kind of piece of equipment to do it.
Awesome, thank you. I think we spent a lot of time talking about hides, and I think we also want to talk about some of the other offal. When it comes to composting, we know that it breaks down really well, as hearing from you, Dr. Rotenberger, and Dave, with what research you've done. But what other potential outlets do we see when it comes to utilization of offal, whether it be things like tongues, liver, heart that are human edible, but some people may have an issue selling them, or if it's a custom locker with them, with the client just not wanting that back, what could be some other utilization for both the human edible and non-edible offal?
The human edible, and particularly so many of the projects we're working with are in areas where there are specific concentrations of ethnic groups that enjoy some of the things that we're not traditionally used to here in the Midwest or whatever. And so it's helping to identify that. I just completed a sort of a update on the meat marketplace, and one of the huge trends that is underway is the growth in ethnic cuisine. So it's not only producing these products for that particular ethnic group. A lot of younger consumers today kind of consider themselves as global citizens, and they want to try different cuisine made from different things. So, that's an opportunity there. Then the pet food, or I would call it the pet products. The challenge is in producing pet food as a product is that's very highly regulated. There's a group called AFCO that is sort of the de facto regulator of pet food. And if you're producing something that is labeled as pet food, it has to be a complete and balanced diet. The theory is that companion animal is getting all of their nutrition from that bowl of food that they're eating. So it's got to have all of the nutrients in the right balance, and that can be a little more difficult. But when it comes to things like pet treats and the like that are listed as supplemental and occasional, that is much easier to make. And you can many times do that with equipment that's already in your plant. You know, smokers, for example. I was involved with a company at one point that we produced some. They were ground and formed jerky treats for pets, and the folks we used had a product that they produced for human production. So once a week, they just changed the label and ran it through for what we were producing. So those are some opportunities there. And then I know some of the work that AURI did earlier this year is really looking into what are some of the opportunities for collagen in the medical, areas there. Um, that's that's a stone that still needs to be turned over a lot more right now to help us figure out how that could benefit smaller producers.
I would just add to what David has said. We're in the upper Midwest into North Dakota. So you wouldn't expect us to have an ethnic group, but we cannot keep enough oxtails and tongues in this place. Granted, we're not a very big facility, but like Dave said, it isn't just the ethnic people. There's other people now that are exploring that. One thing you brought up, Dave, was the medical field. And I just happened to recall that blood products could be used in the medical field. There again, I'm sure there's regulations that have to be followed and contamination and all the rest of that. I don't know if that's a legitimate avenue to explore or not, but that is another use for the blood. And that could be a thing that some group could explore and see what the steps are to sell that blood. And this may be a form by which you could do this.
Yep. Absolutely. And I know I was down in Puerto Rico. I've been down there a couple of times this year working with a pork producers co-op there. And, all of their blood, they capture that for blood sausage. I've eaten it. I haven't really acquired the taste for it yet, but it's very popular there. So, there are those opportunities.
That's where an organization like this can really show themselves by developing those little items that would not take a lot for small facilities to take advantage of if we had someone else that laid out the program for us to follow.
Yep. Mm-hmm. I do just want to say that is definitely an area that we're looking at with AURI, and we are looking to hopefully get out some sort of easy to follow roadmap for a processor who's looking to turn this cost stream like you've talked about, Dave and Bill. It's expensive to manage offal right now. You used to be able to get paid for offal getting picked up from rendering companies, and now you've gone to paying for it. So we're trying to find how to make that cost either just to a break even or hopefully put a little bit more money into processors' pockets through the utilization of typically things that are seen as a cost or a potential waste. So Dave, if someone is looking to go down the pet food route, is there any additional inspection level that they would have to gain in their facility, or are they good with whether it be custom, state inspection, or federal inspection?
Well, if pet food is under FDA regulation. So generally when you go and you take products and you make it into a pet, you put some charcoal on it and it's inedible, but it can still be made into a pet products, pet food and pet treats. One of the things, though, that there is an opportunity, and this requires your inspector is going to have to hang around a little bit longer, but there is a real growing demand for human grade pet food. Again, people want to feed Fido and Fluffy just like they do Dick and Jane in their house. And the requirements, though, for labeling anything as human grade is that not only do the ingredients have to be human grade, it has to be manufactured under human grade conditions. And, that fits the bill of a lot of smaller processors that are already under inspection. Is that if you just wanted to go through the extra step and having your inspector there while you're manufacturing those products, then you have the opportunity on the front label to market your product as human grade.
So Dave, what items in the processing would you use for that?
Oh gosh, you can use a lot of your bee trim, a lot of your lower grade products, hearts, liver, all of those things are perfect. Liver, you got to be a little careful for because they're so high in, want to say, vitamin A that you need to be a little careful of that. Um, if you're using the lungs, the liver, and those type of things, which are great for pet treats, um, those have to be labeled as lungs and liver. If you're using the heart, it's a muscle, so it can just be labeled as beef. If you're making it out of the hearts, if it's muscle meat, it can be labeled as beef or pork or lamb or whatever. If it's an organ, it has to be labeled specifically as organ meat or that specific organ.
So Dave, we're talking about human grade now.
Yep.
Okay, so you could take that raw product and have it inspected and frozen.
You take that liver and have it inspected and frozen and packaged. And as long as the inspector is there while you're doing it, you're doing it on the same equipment that you're manufacturing, your other products on, yes, then you have the opportunity to label that. And that's labeled out again. The organization is the Association of American Feed Control Officials, that puts out every year oh gosh, what do they call it? Their official publication. And that lists all of the steps that are required to be able to label it as human grade.
So is there a specific avenue by which you could merchandise that rather than just local?
Yeah, there are. I mean, that's again working with the Pet Sustainability Coalition and some others, is trying to identify companies out there. There are small regional pet food processing companies or marketing companies that are looking for those kind of ingredients. So that's part of what we're trying to do is connect those companies with folks that can supply those ingredients.
I would be interested in connecting with you.
You bet. Let's have a conversation on that.
Okay.
All right. We just had a question come in, and I'm not sure if anyone here would know specifically, but what would be the cost to run that, like an eco drum composting system, if you know what the electrical draw of that is?
No, the only thing I know on that is it's run by a 220 volt motor. So when I was there, they were using electricity, but you could use diesel, you could do anything. But that's one of the things that they tout, is that it's a fairly energy efficient system.
Well, what I'm using for composting is simply a front end loader.
Yep.
Just turn the pile. Just keep track of it and your temperatures, and after a while you get a sense of how often you need to turn it. I have to admit that I'm not very scientific about what I'm doing, and I need to improve on that from taking samples about carbon to nitrogen ratio, as well as there is a probe that you can use to measure the CO2 level in the bottom of your pile, which is the carbon source, to evaluate how you're doing with your compost pile.
All right, we had another one come in asking Dr. Rotenberger, how much are you spending on dry matter for composting with your roughly 10 head a week plants?
I don't spend anything for my organic carbon source, because I have a ranch and I can haul all kinds of stuff in here. However, any size community, you could use the leaves, the branches, all of that will compost. You just have to be careful not to take in the plastics and the tin and that sort of thing. So there's all kinds of sources for your carbon organic material. Don't have to spend a lot of money to get that.
And Dr. Unberg, what's the typical time that it takes? And I know winter's different than summer, but yeah, what's the time that it really takes for you to turn that into usable compost?
In order for it to get really to the point that I'm comfortable in using it, 6 months.
Okay.
You have to, I think I was turning it too often to start with, and I wasn't getting the digestion in it that I would have liked, that I needed, and the heat. But it needs to stay about 30 days on your first initial row before you turn it, and then start another row, and then go back to yours and add more offal to it and organic material to it.
Do you run into challenges in one of those, Montana winters and spells that you get in January or February?
Well, I've got one right now. It's 22 above. But no, surprisingly, I had compost that I was using as an organic source because it was too wet and I couldn't get organic material in here. So I went back and used some that I originally had. There was still heat in that, even being there a year. But no, the winters, the pile I thought would freeze. And that was an issue that the people that I were visiting with to start with, those piles never freeze. They may get crust on the surface, but when you turn them, they'll thaw out. You can process and work that all year round.
All right. Well, I know we had some talks on the regulatory side as far as utilizing offal, but are there any regulatory guidelines or restrictions that someone would have to go to start with composting in their state? I know you're in North Dakota, but have you had anything like that?
Yes, I went through the local zoning commission first, and then there is you get a permit from the state of North Dakota to run a composting system. It's pretty broad and generic. Basically, it's just making the process look professional. Don't just throw it out there and leave it open. You need to cover it. You need to make it look like you're involved in the process and not just helter skelter. That's basically all they're looking for, is that the wildlife can't get into it, the dogs in town and that sort of thing. It's not very restrictive.
Well, that's good to hear. Another question that came in was, how big of a machine are you utilizing? Because the person asking also processes 10 animals a week. And I guess a better question is potentially not how big of a machine you're using, but how big of a machine do you think you need to properly run or turn a compost pile like that?
Well, I started off with a regular Bobcat skid steer loader, but through these grants that the federal government is allowing us, I bought a mini loader, which is large enough. The biggest thing is, if the more volume you have, the more time you have to spend with it. But a mini loader would work fine. We use the mini loader to haul our offal out of the facility and put it in our rows. And then we take the organic material and cover it up with that same mini loader. So basically for us, it's one piece of equipment. Now I am looking into a turner. There are turners that are made for windrows. And the reason I'm looking into that is to get, when it gets to the final product, you get a better disbursement of everything with the moisture and the bones. So you get a better distribution of the calcium and phosphorus things that are in your pile.
All right. I guess so I just want to remind anyone on the short course right now, if you do have any questions pop up, please feel free to put them in the question and answer section. I guess one thing that could be useful for anyone who's looking at starting a composting, what were some initial challenges that you ran into and how did you remedy them? That way, anyone who's looking at getting into this might miss those potential pitfalls and start off on the best foot.
I'd have to say it's just take the initiative to do it. There really aren't really any pitfalls of doing it. As long as you've got the land, the surface area to do it, and you're not having your runoff run into a creek or some sort of drainage system. If you're self-contained within your own property, that'd be one of the things that you need to look at. But otherwise, it's just take the initiative to do it, because it's not that complicated. It can be complicated if you want to make it complicated. If you want to do it right, it is complicated. But if you just want to compost it and reduce the expense of hauling it someplace, you can do it.
All right. I guess this is kind of a broad question when it comes to the fact of byproducts utilization, but other than price, obviously price is a very big factor with this. What do you all think is the biggest issue facing processors in terms of either removal of byproduct or potential utilization of it?
Well, volume, just getting to the critical mass of a volume to be able to do something if you're going into the commercial. I think a lot of smaller processors, and again, I'll go back to the pet food thing, doing something on the local level is real feasible. And if you got a retail store in your processing shop, just to have those, there along with it. But when it comes to then trying to supply some of the larger manufacturers and marketers, is trying to get the critical mass. Again, just because of the number of folks that we're working with in our technical assistance network right now, is, we're finding some commonalities among processors that are doing different things. For example, there are now at least 20 tribally run processing operations in the US. And so the opportunity to identify that and produce some, products that are tribally raised on tribal lands is a huge opportunity. So we're trying to sort through that and identify it to help, for lack of a better term, create some hubs to be able to aggregate the critical mass for some commercial distribution.
I just add to what Davis said. When I got into this industry, I thought it was a matter of just processing an animal and having the meat go out the front door. There is a unlimited amount of avenues by which this facility can participate in. Your imagination is your limit to what we can do. It's just mind-boggling. Every day you turn around, well, I can do that, I could do this, I could do that. You just have to have someone like this forum throw out some of those ideas and help do it. Just need somebody to reinforce what we're doing and to help us explore the avenues by which to do it.
Well, I'm not seeing too many more questions pop in. I think an interesting thing would be to just ask each of you to share any last thoughts on this for everyone listening, whether it be in terms of composting, pet food, leather utilization, or any new and interesting findings of utilizations of hides and leathers that could potentially be coming down the pipe.
I'll start off with this is a real priority. All of this utilization, whole carcass utilization, is a huge priority for our whole technical assistance network moving forward. And particularly, it's great that AURI is a part of it because that's really where you hone in. I just like to throw out to everyone, when we got into this providing technical assistance, I think a lot of folks thought that we are limited to helping people find grants and apply for grants, and we have a broad range of scope of work. All of us that are in this network, that includes supply chain development. And one of the things, if we're going to create a more resilient, diverse, and equitable meat processing system, is we've got to relook at the supply chain. We've got to make some changes in the supply chain to bring back some opportunities for smaller producers. So moving forward, from now that we've kind of got getting through the grants phase and into the implementation phase, all of us within this technical assistance network are going to be working on how can we crack the code, so to speak, on doing some of these things to get some value out of that other half of the animal.
Just to also add on, a lot of what can be, some future potential for, utilizing waste from this industry. Of course, I mean, we talked extensively about composting, but there are a lot of technologies coming in which are increasingly looking at waste as the starting material for either producing energy or for producing fuel in different forms, or for extracting the valuable materials and using that as a starting point instead of your petrochemical based starting points. So there is a lot more interest in this space because of a lot of the sustainability and these kind of initiatives. uh, Organizations are looking at where the waste is going to be available. Of course, a lot of the technologies like pyrolysis, gasification came up with your typical lignocellulosic feedstock, which is, of course, your plant matter, and that's what they work for. But they are now increasingly being adapted to, multiple kinds of waste. For example, your municipal solid waste, you could consider as a collection of many different kinds of waste. So the process is slowly being adapted to be more generic. So there will be an increasing interest from people who hold this technology, who would want to find a consistent, reliable supply of an alternative starting point for a lot of materials. These technologies are, however, I would say, they are beyond the pilot, but they're still not at the commercial stage. So there would be opportunities when these companies look for where they can set up, where they can do their trials. And I would say there is a lot of interesting activity in that space in terms of conversion of organic matter into energy or so I mean, I would say, yes, there's still a lot of uncertainty right now, but the ecosystem is sort of combining and figuring it out. And while that process, of course, would take some time, but there's definitely a lot of potential coming, with a lot of different technologies which would utilize a lot of the waste from different industries. So
To put this in a perspective, and Dave hit on it a little bit, is that think of it, to me, I think of it this way. There's a 1,500-pound animal that comes into my facility. I kill it, in just round numbers, but I kill it and there's 50% of it goes out in the offal immediately. Then there's another 50% that gets lost in the processing, in the cutting of the different cuts of meat and that sort of thing. So 25% of it goes out the front door, 75% of it goes out the back door. And that is all stuff that we as the local plant have access to, and it is ours to dispose of. That's a lot of a material that has a potential for income for me. And I look at it that way.
And no doubt, if I had to use closing comments, it'd be very similar to that. I mean, I worked in an industry that was large, and adding value to byproducts was difficult at large scale. This is one of those cases where I think it's even harder at a small scale. But people don't think about our industry from a yield standpoint, and how much product is extremely underutilized. And I probably should have shared up front. I mean, you talked about the technical assistance program, and I am a member of the American Meat Science Association, and had volunteered a little bit of my time to try to help through that organization with the technical assistance, and that's where the byproducts kept coming up as a key topic on it. So glad to help or put any time against this that people want. So.
Glad you mentioned that, Dan, because American Meat Science Association is a key part of the technical assistance network that's working with AMS. And let me just one last thing too, Clay. When you talk about the environmental impact and the like, USDA put out a ton of money in these climate smart agriculture grants here over the last year. And when I go through the awardees for those, I see that a little over 30% of those grants that went out have livestock as a component of their grant. And some of those are focused on byproduct utilization. So I think that that's an opportunity for us, us being small processors, working with the folks that got these awards for the climate smart grants, is to be a part of that network of how do we get some monetization out of those byproducts.
Fantastic. That's great to hear. Thank you, Dan, Dave, Jerry, and Dr. Rotenberger, all for your insights, and really excited for how hopefully this will come across and help out a lot of smaller processors. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Laura Bachmeyer.
Hello again, everyone. Again, thank you for everyone's participation today. But this concludes our AURI and USDA AMS short course on short and long-term strategies for byproduct and high utilization. Again, huge thank you and appreciation for Stephen, Dan, Dr. Rotenberg, Dave, and Jerry for their time today, as well. Appreciate everyone that participated today. I think a lot of good engagement throughout the panel portion and other questions that were arise from this, and hope there were some good learnings from this. So today's short course, again, is presented by the Agricultural Utilization Research Institute of Minnesota, where our mission is to accelerate the expansion of the agricultural economy by empowering and expand uses and markets of agriculturally derived products. As well, on behalf, we also have to recognize the United States Department of Agricultural Marketing Services in terms of empowering local and regional meat processing, as well as being a part of the meat and poultry processing technical assistance. So again, for more information on today's program, and as well as our webinar and any of the work that we have described today, please visit AURI.org. But as well, a lot of other resources were described throughout today's short course. So please contact us for that information. But we also, as a follow-up, will be sharing that with each of our participants for today. So again, this short course has been recorded. So if you would like to share with any colleagues or other processors that you think that would benefit from this, please be able to share that, and that will be available online in the very near future. So again, on behalf of AURI, we thank everyone in their efforts today for this Empowering Local and Regional Meat Processing Industry short course, and really being able to discuss this topic in terms of challenges, opportunities, and experiences that I hope we all gathered learnings from. So as an organization, excuse me, USDA AMS and our MPPTA network provider, our team is very valued in supporting the supply chain. And here's just a few lists of our, again, that you've listened to a bit today in terms of moderation from our AURI team with our contact information. As well, again, in follow-up, we will be able to share our speakers and panelists' contact information to have any follow-up questions that you may have. So beyond this list, I also would encourage participants to check out our newly updated Meat Science webpage. If you click on the link right there, you'll be directed to our webpage, which have some of those resources. And again, we'll follow up with some others that have been described today. But with that, we appreciate everyone's time today and look forward to hearing from you. So with that, again, thank you for participating, and we hope that you have an enjoyable rest of your day. So thank you. Take care.